In 1979, the history of Iran was fractured by a year that changed everything. It was nothing short of an earthquake. A monarchy that had stood for 2,500 years came to an end, and in its place an Islamic Republic was born. Today we look back at the sources that help us understand the events and the forces behind this monumental transformation. At the heart of this story stand two towering figures. On one side, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, a monarch determined to rapidly modernize and westernize Iran. On the other, Ayatollah Khomeini, who emerged as perhaps the most formidable opponent of this vision. Their conflict, a struggle that had been simmering for decades, would ultimately define the nation's destiny. The story begins with the Shah. Sources tell us he was incredibly young, just 21 years old when he ascended to the throne in 1941. His father, Reza Shah, had been forced to abdicate by the Allies during World War II, accused of sympathizing with the Nazis. From the very beginning then, the young Shah came to power under the shadow of foreign influence. He was Western educated, and his dream was to build a modern Iran. But his authority was shaky from the start. This fragility was exposed during the oil crisis of 1951 when his prime minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, nationalized the country's oil industry, which had long been dominated by British interests. This bold move set the stage for foreign intervention. In 1953, in a now infamous operation, America's CIA and Britain's MI6 orchestrated a coup that overthrew Mossadegh's government. The Shah was reinstated, this time with absolute power. From this moment on, his position became heavily dependent on American and British support. It was in the shadow of this support that the notorious secret police, SAVAK, was formed. Sources indicate that SAVAK was trained not only by American agencies, but according to some reports by Israeli agencies as well. Its purpose was clear: to crush
dissent through violence and intimidation. The fear of SAVAK was pervasive and the brutality was real, though some sources suggest that the number of prisoners was often exaggerated by the opposition as a form of propaganda. Then in 1963, the Shah introduced his White Revolution. On paper, it was a remarkably progressive agenda. It included land reforms, industrialization, granting women the right to vote, and expanding literacy. And it did bring some positive changes, such as weakening the old feudal system. However, its unintended consequences proved to be far more profound. Firstly, the program deeply angered the clergy and other traditional segments of society, who saw these secular Western-style changes as an attack on their values. Secondly, the land reforms were flawed. While peasants received land, they were not given the resources, the tractors, the seeds, the support needed to cultivate it. As a result, many were forced to sell their land and flock to the cities.
This created a new crisis. The city saw a rapid growth of slums and widespread unemployment, shattering the traditional social balance. It was a stark example of how top-down, rapid change can breed chaos. And it was at this very moment that Ayatollah Khomeini's opposition came roaring into the open. He had long been a critic of the Shah's policies, but he took a particularly harsh stance against the White Revolution, calling it a conspiracy against Islam. His sermons electrified the public. In 1963, massive demonstrations erupted, leading to a violent crackdown. Khomeini was arrested and in 1964 exiled, first to Turkey and then to Iraq. But exile did not diminish his influence. If anything, it magnified it. From Iraq and later from Paris, his messages were smuggled into Iran on cassette tapes, reaching every corner of the country. It was during his time in exile that he fully developed his theory of Velaya-e-Faqih, the concept of an Islamic government ruled by a supreme jurist.
While Khomeini was influencing events from afar, conditions inside Iran were deteriorating. The oppression of SAVAK was constant, corruption was rampant, and the lavish spending of the royal family was a source of public anger. A glaring example was the extravagant 1971 celebration of 2,500 years of the Persian monarchy at Persepolis. A fortune was spent on the event while ordinary people were struggling with economic hardship. The nation's oil wealth was not being distributed fairly. This created a dangerous mixture, a push for modernity that felt like an assault on cultural and religious values, combined with severe economic inequality and political repression. In early 1978, a government-controlled newspaper published an insulting article about Khomeini. It was the spark that lit the fuse. Protests erupted in the holy city of Qum and quickly spread across the country. A tragic cycle began. Demonstrators would protest, the government would crack down, and people would be killed. Then, on 40-day anniversaries, more protests would follow, leading to more deaths and clashes with security forces.
Then the mourning ceremonies for the dead, held on the 40th day, would turn into even larger demonstrations.
In August 1978, the Cinema Rex was set on fire and hundreds of people burned to death. The government blamed the opposition while the opposition blamed Savak. Then in September came Black Friday. In Tehran's Jaleh Square, the army fired directly into a crowd of protesters, killing many. It was the point of no return. Public fury reached its absolute peak. During this turmoil, Khomeini was expelled from Iraq and relocated to Paris, where he became the center of global media attention. From there, a single call from him could trigger nationwide strikes in Iran. The oil industry ground to a halt, crippling the economy. The army, once the Shah's pillar of strength, was now divided. Some remained loyal, but many were unhappy with the situation. The Shah himself was suffering from cancer, his decision-making faltering. The Western powers that had once saved him, America and Britain,
were now backing away. In January 1979, at a conference of Western leaders in Guadeloupe, it became clear that they were no longer willing to save the Shah. The game was over. On January 16, 1979, the Shah left Iran for the last time. Then came the historic day, February 1st, 1979. Ayatollah Khomeini returned to Tehran in triumph. Greeted by a sea of millions, it was an unbelievable spectacle. Upon his arrival, he rejected the Shah's appointed prime minister, Shah and established his own interim government. He consolidated power with remarkable speed. In the months that followed, all potential rivals, liberals, leftists, and communists, were either co-opted or eliminated. In April 1979, a referendum was held. The question was simple: do you want an Islamic republic instead of a monarchy? According to sources, over 98% of the people voted yes. A new constitution was drafted, which named Khomeini as the Rabba-i Muazzam, or supreme leader, granting him almost absolute
authority. Sharia law was implemented. The changes between pre- and post-revolutionary Iran were profound. Culturally, Western influences, lifestyles, music, and dress were discouraged or banned. For women, some of the legal rights gained during the Shah's era, particularly in family law, were curtailed, and the hijab was made mandatory. Yet, in a fascinating paradox, literacy rates, especially among women, increased after the revolution, as the new government focused on education. However, access for women to certain fields, like engineering, and to high-level positions became more difficult. This was the story of that historic, dramatic year in Iran, the end of a monarchy and the dawn of an entirely new system. A transformation that left a deep and lasting impact, not only on Iran, but on the entire region and the world. It forces us to ask a profound question. Was this merely the replacement of one form of authoritarianism with another? Or was it the complex, explosive result of social injustice, popular aspirations, religious ideology, and international politics? A legacy whose echoes are still felt today. It is a question that demands our continued reflection.